At first, nobody paid much attention to the old man who swept the courtyard. Every morning, just after dawn, he would shuffle through the iron gates of the military compound, pushing a creaky broom across the gravel paths and concrete walkways. He wore a faded brown coat, sleeves too long, and an old cap pulled low over his silver-gray hair. His back was slightly bent, his boots worn thin. Most of the young recruits barely noticed him. Some nodded politely. Others didn't even bother. To them, he was just the janitor, the man who swept the leaves and emptied the trash cans. But something about him was different. Quiet, yes, but not timid. He moved slowly, yet with purpose. His eyes, though tired, had a sharpness that didn't match the rest of him. Like he saw everything. Like he missed nothing. Private Jensen was one of the first to notice it. Fresh out of training, barely 20, he had once seen the old man pick up a dropped rifle in the yard. The way he handled it, steady hands, clean grip, smooth like a habit, stayed with Jensen for weeks. "Sir, you see the way he held that M4? He'd asked another recruit later that day. They just laughed. "Man, he's just the guy who takes out the trash." But Jensen couldn't shake it. And he wasn't the only one. Over time, strange little things began to stand out. One day, during a morning drill, a young recruit lost his footing on the obstacle course. Before the sergeant could react, the old man was already there, catching the boy mid-fall, steadying him, checking for injury. Fast. Too fast for a man his age. Another time, a senior officer mentioned losing a decades-old medal during a storm. It turned up the next day, polished, waiting on his desk. No one said how it got there. Stories started to spread. Some whispered that he used to be a soldier. Others said he was just some drifter who got a maintenance job through a family connection. A few believed he had gone a little soft in the head, that he thought he still belonged there, among the ranks. But no one asked him directly. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was short, polite, reserved. Still, the mystery grew. And then came the day everything changed. It was a hot afternoon, drills had ended early, and most of the base had settled into a slow, sleepy quiet. Jensen was sitting under a tree near the training yard, polishing his boots, when the black SUVs rolled in. Their tinted windows, matte finish, and no-nonsense military plates gave everyone pause. Within seconds, officers were lining up. A general stepped out, tall and sharp in his uniform, flanked by aides and high-ranking staff. The air shifted. People stood straighter. Conversations died mid-sentence. But it wasn't the general's arrival that stunned everyone. It was what happened next. As the general crossed the yard, his eyes locked onto the old man sweeping near the supply building. He stopped. Squinted. Then, in front of the entire base, the general raised his hand in salute. "Captain?" The word cut through the air like a knife. Silence fell. Even the birds seemed to pause. Everyone turned. The recruits, the lieutenants, the senior officers. All staring at the man with the broom. He didn't move for a second. Then, slowly, he straightened up. Not all the way, but enough. His eyes met the general's. He nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement. No surprise. No confusion. Just calm. The general stepped forward. "It's been a long time," he said, his voice softer now. The old man gave a small smile. "Yes, sir. It has." That was it. Nothing more. But the effect was instant. People around them froze, unsure of what they were seeing. The recruits exchanged wide-eyed looks. Officers fumbled for names and memories. Who was this man? Why did the general, a general, just call him captain? Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into speculation. Rumors flew through the compound like wildfire. Some said he was a decorated war hero who had vanished after his last mission. Others believed he had saved the general's life in some covert operation that never made the news. A few thought he had been part of a black ops unit, off the record, no medals, no recognition. But the truth? Well, no one really knew. Not yet. Jensen couldn't stop thinking about it. That salute. That word. Captain? It wasn't just a title, it carried weight. Respect. History. Something sacred in a place like this. And for someone like that man, the quiet old man with the broom, to receive it? That meant something big. Something that had been hidden for a long time. Over the next few days, things changed. Subtly. Some recruits began greeting the old man with more care. Some officers watched him with quiet curiosity. But the man himself stayed the same. Same coat. Same broom. Same quiet nods. He didn't talk about that day. He didn't correct anyone. He didn't deny it either. And yet a few started digging. Old files. Declassified records. Photographs with missing names. An injury report from 15 years ago that matched the limp. A blurred face in a mission photo that suddenly didn't feel so distant. Clues. Fragments. Pieces of a puzzle everyone wanted to solve. But the deeper they looked, the more questions they found. Why did a man with such a past end up sweeping floors? Why did the general come for him, after all this time? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what happened in the years between the medals and the mop? The story doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. Because behind the quiet eyes of that old man lies a truth more powerful than anyone could have guessed. A truth that could shake the very walls of the institution he once served, and maybe still does. And if you think you know who he really is, you might want to think again. Keep watching. You won't believe what happens next. The night after the general's visit, nobody slept well. Inside the barracks, whispers kept floating through the halls. Recruits who'd barely spoken to each other were suddenly deep in conversation. Even the sergeants, usually so tight-lipped, looked distracted, muttering things like, "Was it him?" or, "I thought he was gone." Every corner of the base buzzed with questions, but no answers. The man with the broom, everyone knew now, wasn't just anyone. And that made people nervous. Jensen lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. He kept playing the moment over and over again in his head. The general. The salute. That one word, captain. It didn't make sense. He had read enough military history to know that titles like that weren't given lightly. They had to be earned. Fought for. That old man had to have a story, one that nobody knew, or maybe one people were trying hard to forget. The next morning, the man showed up just like always. Same gait. Same broom. Same steady steps. But now, everywhere he went, eyes followed. People moved out of his way without even realizing it. Some tried to talk to him, casual greetings, questions masked as small talk, but he brushed them off politely, never slowing down. Whatever had happened the day before didn't seem to change him. Or maybe it changed everything, and he just wasn't showing it. What stood out most wasn't what the man said, it was what he didn't say. He never explained himself. Never acted like he had anything to prove. That quiet confidence made it all more real. It wasn't arrogance. It was something older. Like he'd seen too much to care what people thought anymore. Later that week, Jensen did something he hadn't done before. He went into the records room. Not to snoop, at least that's what he told himself, but just to check. He asked the clerk if there was any file on a captain connected to their base from years back. The clerk gave a long look, then just said, "If there was, it wouldn't be in this room." That only made things more suspicious. Jensen wasn't alone, either. One of the older drill sergeants, a guy named Rooker who'd served over 20 years, was seen standing outside the supply shed one night, looking toward the courtyard. When someone asked what he was doing, he just muttered, "Didn't think I'd see him again," and walked off. Something was hidden here. Some history no one wanted to talk about. One rumor said the old man used to lead a covert unit that disappeared during a mission overseas. Another said he'd taken the fall for a failed operation, top secret, off the books, and the government quietly erased him to avoid blame. Some believed he chose to disappear, walking away from medals and honors after losing too many men. But no one could agree. and without real records it was all just talk. Still, the tension grew. Especially after that second black vehicle arrived. No insignia. No plates. No general this time, just two men in suits who went straight into the command office. They were inside for hours. When they came out, they didn't speak to anyone. But they looked toward the yard. Toward him. And the look on their faces wasn't casual. It was searching. Evaluating. That's when the whispers changed. It wasn't just who he used to be. Now it was why he was here. Was he watching someone? Was he hiding? Or worse, was he waiting? Whatever the answer was, it was clear that night, a storm rolled in, loud, restless, full of wind that rattled windows and carried whispers through the cracks. But the base didn't sleep because of the weather. It was something else. Something in the air. Like the pressure before something breaks. The two men in suits hadn't returned, but their visit left a mark. Orders changed without warning. Patrol schedules were shuffled. Some buildings were suddenly off-limits, with no explanation. People noticed. Especially those who'd been around long enough to tell when something wasn't routine. Jensen kept watching the old man. He wasn't trying to be obvious, but he couldn't stop himself. Something about the way the man carried himself, calm but alert, didn't fit with someone who was just supposed to be sweeping floors. That day, Jensen noticed something else. The man never walked through the base randomly. Every path he took, every spot he paused at, it all followed a pattern. A rhythm. Like he was checking something. Watching something. Almost like he was still on duty. Meanwhile, Sergeant Rooker had started avoiding the man completely. Once, they crossed paths near the vehicle lot, and Rooker turned around before the man even saw him. Or maybe he did see him, and just didn't say anything. Later, Jensen overheard two senior staff talking behind the mess hall. "I thought he was out of the picture." "He was." "Then why is he here now?" Either of them gave an answer. They just walked away, silent and tense. It wasn't just the soldiers who noticed. The civilian staff started acting strange too. The base nurse, who'd worked there almost 10 years, said she swore she recognized the man from an old briefing she wasn't supposed to see. She couldn't remember the details, just the word, extraction, and a blurry photo that looked too much like him. And then there was Corporal Ruiz, the communications tech, who found an encrypted signal bouncing off one of the old towers. It was short. Unreadable. But timed, exactly at the moment the old man passed by it on his route. All of it built towards something no one could name. Like pieces of a puzzle dumped on the floor. But the picture they were forming wasn't clear yet, just hints of danger, secrets, and something very wrong. And then came the missing file. Late one night, a junior officer named Patel was tasked with pulling archived training rosters from the records room. Simple job. In and out. But while digging through the database, he found a folder that had been locked under a restricted name, Operation Quiet Echo. He couldn't open it, but he saw a single line under Personnel that read Status, Inactive. Location, Classified. Rank, Captain. The access attempt triggered a security notice. By morning, Patel was transferred without warning. No goodbye. No explanation. His bunk was empty. His name removed from duty rosters. Just gone. That's when it really hit Jensen. This wasn't just a forgotten soldier's story. Something was being covered up. And someone didn't want it found. Story wasn't just about a forgotten captain. It was about something much bigger. And it wasn't over. Not even close. By the end of the week, the atmosphere on base was tight enough to snap. Soldiers kept their heads down. Orders were followed with extra caution. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen, but no one knew what. The old man, still carrying his broom, still making his rounds, had become the quiet center of it all. He didn't change a thing. And that was maybe the most unsettling part. While everything else cracked under the pressure, he moved like he was walking through a routine he'd memorized years ago. Jensen wasn't sleeping. Not really. He kept going over everything: the general's salute, the missing file, Patel's sudden disappearance. He started keeping notes, a kind of timeline, connecting things that didn't seem to line up. One night, he followed the old man from a distance, careful not to get caught. The man paused behind the weapons bay and looked up at the old radio tower. Then, almost casually, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. It was dark, but Jensen swore it looked like a keycard. A second later, he slipped it away and kept walking like nothing happened. The next day, Rooker finally cracked. He called Jensen into a back room near the storage shed, away from anyone who might overhear. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just leaned close and said, "You don't know what you're stepping into. That man, he did things none of us could. Things we weren't trained for. He was part of something real quiet. Not on paper. Not in medals. The kind of missions where if you come back, you don't come back the same." Jensen asked what happened to the team. Rooker didn't answer. Later that afternoon, the base went into a sudden lockdown. No explanation. No drill. Just alarms and armed guards at every gate. Everyone told to stay inside. Then a helicopter appeared, unmarked, loud and low, circling once before touching down near the operations center. Out came 3 more suits, one holding a briefcase cuffed to his wrist. The old man was nowhere to be seen. People noticed that too. It was almost evening when someone finally spotted him, standing alone in the middle of the airstrip, no broom, no coat, just the wind tugging at his sleeves. His posture was different now. Straighter. Focused. His eyes locked on the helicopter. From a distance, Jensen watched the officers arguing. One of the suits pointed toward the old man, demanding something. The base commander looked shaken. Nervous. Then came the words nobody expected to hear over the loudspeaker. "All personnel, stand down." Silence followed. The suits moved toward the man. Slowly. Carefully. But he didn't move. He just waited. Calm. As if he'd done this before. And that's when the lights across the base suddenly flickered. Then went out. In that moment of darkness, total, tense, suffocating, everyone on that base knew it wasn't about who he was anymore. It was about what was coming next. For 5 long seconds, the base was completely dark. No lights. No alarms. Just the sound of the wind moving through metal and the distant blades of the chopper slowing to a stop. Then the emergency lights flickered on, dim red glows lining the walls and buildings like something out of a war zone. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the lights. It was the fact that the old man was gone. One moment he was standing alone on the airstrip. The next, empty space. The suits panicked. One started yelling into his comm, another ran back to the chopper. The base commander just stood there, frozen. No one could figure out how a man his age could move that fast, or vanish without a trace. But Jensen had a feeling it wasn't luck. It was training. That wasn't the kind of disappearance you learned sweeping sidewalks. That was something else. Something elite. Then came the second signal. Corporal Ruiz, still monitoring the tower frequencies, picked it up at 1803. A brief data burst, encrypted and masked like military chatter, but sent from inside the base. Not outside. Ruiz barely managed to trace it to an unused comms panel in the underground maintenance corridor. A place that hadn't been touched in years. Jensen, now fully caught in the middle of something far beyond his pay grade, made a choice. He went down there. Alone. Just a flashlight, a radio, and a growing sense that whatever this man was running from, or toward, was getting closer. The corridor was cold, damp, and smelled like dust and engine grease. Pipes lined the walls, some still leaking from age. And then, at the far end of the passage, a light. Not red. Not flickering. Steady white. Coming from a room that shouldn't have power. Inside, he found the old man. But he wasn't hiding. He was sitting calmly at a steel table, typing something into a device that looked like a modified field terminal. Jensen barely had time to speak when the man looked up and said, "They were never supposed to find me." His voice was quiet, measured. but it carried weight. Like it had told stories before that never made it into history books. Jensen asked. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "They buried the mission. Not because it failed, but because it worked. Too well. We saw things. Did things. Things that couldn't be explained. So they erased us." He turned the screen toward Jensen. It showed files. Names. Coordinates. Surveillance footage. And one headline buried in a corner of a scanned newspaper: "Small village wiped out in drone misfire. Military denies involvement." Jensen looked closer. The drone ID number matched one from the base. The old man stood up. "They're not here to ask questions," he said. "They're here to make sure the truth dies quiet." And then, footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Not one pair. Multiple. The suits had found them. But they weren't alone. This wasn't just a cleanup anymore. It was a cover-up unraveling. The footsteps grew louder, faster. Boots against metal. Clothes. The old man didn't flinch. Instead, he reached under the table and pulled out a worn canvas bag. Inside, documents, flash drives, even an old ID badge half burned but still readable: Captain Elias Grant. Special Recon. Cleared Level 9. Jensen barely had time to process it before the door burst open. 3 suits came in first, weapons drawn, not standard sidearms, but silencers, the kind used when no one's supposed to hear a shot. Behind them, a soldier stepped in. Not base personnel. His uniform was stripped of insignia. Eyes cold. Movements sharp. Special detail. Government cleanup crew. But Captain Grant moved first. With practiced precision, he slammed a breaker switch beside the door. The lights went out again, and in that second of confusion, Grant grabbed Jensen and dove behind the table. Shots rang out, sparking off the metal walls. Then came a blinding flash. Grant had tossed a small flashbang from his bag. The room filled with smoke and light. Screams. Shouts. Chaos. When the dust cleared, Jensen was outside the tunnel, gasping, ears ringing. Grant had dragged him to safety, but he wasn't with him anymore. Back inside, the shots had stopped. Base security finally arrived, late, too late. But they found the 3 suits unconscious, restrained. The soldier in black was gone. Vanished. Like a ghost. Just like Grant had been for years. But the biggest shock came the next morning. A secure message was delivered to the base commander. It came with proof, data Grant had uploaded during the standoff. It showed surveillance from a long-buried mission. A drone strike that wasn't an accident. A village targeted not because of enemy presence, but to test prototype tech, off the books, off the grid. The suits had come to erase that proof. But Grant had sent it out. To the press. To watchdog groups. To the Pentagon. He exposed everything. Just before disappearing again. No one saw him leave. No security footage. No prints. Just an empty canvas bag left in the maintenance tunnel, and one note, handwritten. Some truths don't die. They wait. The base went back to routine. But for those who were there, especially Jensen, nothing felt normal again. And weeks later, in a small village miles from any base, a quiet man with gray hair was seen sweeping the steps of an old school. Just like before. Weeks passed, but the story didn't fade. News outlets quietly ran stories about declassified documents, government reports, and anonymous whistleblowers. They never mentioned names. Never said who leaked the truth. But those who had been at the base, especially Jensen, knew. Captain Elias Grant had done something no one else dared. He brought the truth into the light and walked away without asking for recognition or reward. The base returned to its routines, but it didn't feel the same. Some of the older officers retired early. The suits never came back. And while no one talked about it openly, there was a silent respect left behind for the man who had once just been seen as the old janitor with a broom. The recruits didn't joke around as much. There was a new kind of focus in their training, as if they now understood there was more to service than following orders. There was a weight to the uniform that couldn't be taught in drills. Jensen stayed at the base, but he changed too. He worked harder, asked more questions, paid attention to the things most people ignored. One evening, he sat near the radio tower alone, reading through the old notes he had taken during those strange, tense days. He still didn't know where Grant had gone. No one did. But once in a while, late at night, a short encrypted signal would bounce through the tower, harmless, random-looking. But Jensen knew better. He didn't try to trace it anymore. He just let it pass. In the end, the story wasn't about a hero in uniform or a dramatic battle. It was about the quiet ones. The ones who carry secrets, who sweep the floor and listen, who step in when no one else will. It reminded people that sometimes the most powerful actions come from those in the shadows, those forgotten or overlooked. Captain Grant didn't return for glory. He came back to finish what was started. To make things right, even if no one would ever thank him. The village where he was last seen? No one asked questions there. He kept to himself, cleaned the same steps every morning, and watched the sunrise like a man finally at peace. Some said he'd earned it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the ending he chose all along.